The CEO's voice, cold and sharp, sliced through the stale air of the conference room. We don't want outdated people in this company anymore. Moren, your services are no longer needed. My daughter-in-law, Amara, watched with a satisfied smirk as I, the woman who'd helped build this company, gathered my belongings, every eye in the room fixed on my quiet humiliation. As I reached the elevator, I turned back, offering a serene smile and a calm, "Good luck, Amara. You're going to need it." Just as the doors began to close, my son, Mitchell, burst through the main entrance, his face a mask of confusion, a look that promised Amara's calculated game was about to unravel. You here follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has. The conference room was filled with a heavy silence, the kind that settles right before a storm. And then Amara's voice sliced through the tension like a blade. We don't want outdated people in this company anymore. Her words rang out, bouncing off the glass walls with brutal finality. I could feel every set of eyes shift toward me, 23 employees, many of whom I had hired or mentored myself, now bearing witness to my downfall. I sat still, hands folded neatly in my lap, trying to make sense of the moment. At 65, I'd lived through more storms than most, losing my husband, raising Mitchell alone, and building this company from nothing into what it is today. I thought I'd learned to expect anything, but nothing could have prepared me for this betrayal. Your services are no longer needed, Amara continued, her voice sugar-coated now, painfully sweet. Please clean out your office by the end of the day. The humming of the fluorescent lights seemed louder than ever in the silence that followed. I spotted Sarah from accounting discreetly wiping tears with a tissue, and Tom from marketing struggling to form words, his mouth opening and closing helplessly. These weren't just co-workers. These people had become my second family, and now they were attending what felt like my professional funeral. I stood slowly, knees stiff from sitting too long. The meeting, what I had thought was a simple quarterly review, was clearly staged, and I'd walked right into it. But even as I rose, expecting my body to tremble with rage or sorrow, I felt strangely calm. A deep, eerie calm, the kind that comes in the center of a hurricane. Well, I said, my voice steady, I suppose that's that. I reached for my notepad and pen, the ones that had accompanied me through decades of meetings and deals. I gave Amara a nod. I'll gather my things. Her brows lifted ever so slightly. This wasn't the reaction she had planned for. She had expected a scene, maybe some tears, or a desperate plea that would justify her decision. Instead, I walked toward the door, my back straight, my chin lifted. Moren, a voice called out. It was James from the design team. His voice cracked slightly. This isn't right. You built this place. I turned to face him and the rest of the room. My heart ached at their faces, some tearful, some stunned. Thank you, James. That means more than you know. And then my eyes met Amara's. For a brief second, something passed across her face, a flicker. Was it hesitation? Guilt? Fear? The walk to my office felt longer than it had ever been. 37 years I'd given this company. I started here as a secretary when Mitchell was still in preschool. Over the decades, I'd climbed the ranks. Operations manager, then vice president. I'd watched this place transform from a small family business into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. And in less than 5 minutes, it had all been taken away. My office door creaked as I opened it, something I'd meant to fix for months. Now someone else would have to handle it. The room felt smaller, like Amara's words had physically shrunk everything I had built. I retrieved a cardboard box from the closet, the one I had kept for charity donations. How ironic it would now carry the remains of my career. I began packing. First went the photos. Mitchell's graduation, a shot of us celebrating our first major contract, a holiday group photo where everyone had still smiled at me. Then the chipped coffee mug I dropped during a stressful budget meeting 5 years ago. The little succulent I had managed to keep alive despite my lack of a green thumb. The award from the Chamber of Commerce for our community impact. As I wrapped each item with care, my thoughts wandered to Amara. Beautiful, ambitious, always polished. With her perfect blonde hair and her degree from one of those elite universities, she had appeared in our lives like a thunderstorm 3 years ago. Mitchell had fallen for her instantly. I had tried to embrace her, Tried to see the woman my son saw, but there was always something I couldn't name. Something that sat wrong with me deep in my gut. A quiet knock on the door frame startled me. "Mrs. Patterson?" It was Emily, one of the younger accountants. Her eyes were red, a crumpled tissue in hand. "Yes, dear?" "I just wanted to say, this is wrong. Everyone knows how much you've done for the company, for all of us." I smiled, genuinely touched. "Thank you, Emily. That means a lot. But sometimes change is necessary." Even as I said the words, I didn't believe them. This wasn't about change or moving forward. This was something else. Power, maybe. Control. Spite. Once Emily left, I continued packing in silence. By 4 o'clock, the office was stripped bare. The furniture remained, but the walls were empty. No certificates, no personal photos, just hollow space. I stood by the window, committing the view to memory, the parking lot where I had watched countless employees come and go, where I had once walked in as a young widow looking for a job, where I had grown into a leader. I carried the box through the main floor. I could feel the eyes, some openly crying, some pretending to focus on their screens. But I saw them, peeking from the corners of their eyes, their sadness unspoken. Amara stood by the elevator, arms crossed, a smug smile playing on her lips. "I trust you have everything," she asked. Her voice was cold, calculated. I adjusted the box in my arms and looked at her. Really looked. The tailored suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The diamond studs gleaming in her ears. The wedding ring that matched Mitchell's. The one he had worn so proudly. "I do," I replied evenly. And then, to my own surprise, I smiled. Not bitterly, not with resentment, but with something almost serene. "Good luck, Amara. You're going to need it." I saw it then. For a split second, her mask slipped. Her confidence wavered, and I caught a glimpse. Panic, uncertainty, something she didn't want anyone else to see. But the elevator dinged and the doors slid open. I stepped in without another word. As they closed behind me and I began my descent to the parking garage, that flicker in Amara's eyes stayed with me. What was she afraid of? What did she think I didn't know? Or maybe, just maybe, what did I know that she had forgotten? As the soft chime of the elevator faded behind me, I moved toward my car, that strange sense of calm still wrapped around me like a shield I didn't quite understand. But beneath that calm was something else, an instinct whispering this wasn't the end. Not by far. Settling into the driver's seat in the company parking lot, I was suddenly carried back, almost unwillingly, to that spring evening 3 years ago. The night Mitchell first brought Amara home for dinner. I should have trusted my gut back then. But love has a funny way of making us ignore our instincts. And Mitchell, my Mitchell, had looked so happy, glowing in a way I hadn't seen since his teenage years when he'd fallen for his high school sweetheart. "Mom, I want you to meet someone special," he'd said over the phone that Tuesday afternoon. His voice was breathless, boyish even. "Could you make your famous pot roast this Sunday?" Of course I'd said yes. At 38, Mitchell had had his fair share of girlfriends, but none had ever been introduced to me. This one clearly mattered. That whole weekend I was a whirlwind, fussing over every detail of the house, polishing silverware that hadn't been touched in months, and rehearsing casual, welcoming things to say. When Sunday arrived, I was just pulling the roast from the oven when I heard Mitchell's key turn in the lock. "Mom, we're here," he called out, and something in his voice, nervous anticipation laced with pride, made my heart flutter. "Coming," I called, wiping my hands on my apron, hurrying to the living room. There he stood, beaming, arm around the most breathtaking woman I'd ever laid eyes on. She was tall, almost ethereal, with long, flowing blonde hair that shimmered like it belonged in a shampoo ad. Her dress was simple but undeniably expensive, the kind of elegance that whispered wealth without the vulgarity of showing off. "Mom, this is Amara Chen," Mitchell said, eyes never straying from her face. "Amara, this is my mom, Moren." Amara stepped forward, offering a cover-worthy smile. "Mrs. Patterson, I've heard so much about you. Mitchell talks about you all the time." Her handshake was firm, her confidence clear. But something in her eyes, cool, calculating, didn't quite match the warmth of her smile. "Please call me Moren," I said, inwardly chastising myself for being too quick to judge. I hadn't heard a word about her before this, which told me Mitchell had kept her a secret. I teased, and I've heard nothing about you, so my son's been keeping secrets. Mitchell chuckled, but it sounded off. I wanted it to be a surprise. Amara and I met at that business conference in Chicago last month. Throughout dinner, Amara was the model guest. She complimented the food, asked about every family photo, and laughed with genuine-sounding delight at Mitchell's childhood stories. She even offered to help with the dishes, though I noticed how careful she was not to risk chipping a single manicured nail. "Your home is so cozy," she said as we washed dishes together. "It must have been such a sweet place to grow up, Mitchell." But something about the way she said cozy made my shoulders tighten. There was a softness to the word, but also a note of subtle disdain. And when she thought I wasn't watching, I caught her eyes sweeping over our modest furniture like someone inspecting antiques in a quaint little museum. After they left that night, I called my sister Linda. "There's something off about her," I told her, staring at the faint lipstick mark Amara had left on one of my best water glasses. "Moren, you always say that about Mitchell's girlfriends," Linda reminded me. "Remember Jessica? You were convinced she wanted his money, and she turned out to be one of the sweetest girls we've ever met." She wasn't wrong. I was overprotective. Mitchell was all I had. Since his father died when he was 15, we'd leaned on each other. Maybe more than we should have. But in the months that followed, I watched as Amara slowly, almost imperceptibly, stitched herself into the fabric of Mitchell's world. She had an MBA from Northwestern, she told us, and worked in corporate consulting. At the moment, she was between roles, as she delicately put it, having left her last position due to philosophical differences with management. Mitchell, meanwhile, was enchanted. He began changing, not gradually, but in small, decisive steps. Gone were the khakis and polos he'd always worn. In their place, tailored suits Amara had helped him pick out. His apartment was transformed too. The cluttered coziness disappeared, replaced by something straight out of a designer catalog. "She has such good taste," he gushed to me over lunch one afternoon. "You should see what she's done with my place. It's like having a whole new life." That phrase lingered. A whole new life. As if the life he had before, with me, with his childhood roots, was something he needed to shed. More and more, Mitchell began missing our lunches. There was always a reason: business dinners, spontaneous weekend getaways planned by Amara. When we did manage to meet, she was usually with him, always steering the conversation to topics I couldn't contribute to. And when Mitchell would share stories about the PAM, she'd interrupt with a soft laugh and say, "Oh, Mitchell, you're being modest," as if the version of him I knew wasn't quite right. When the wedding announcement came, 18 months after that first dinner, it wasn't exactly a surprise, but it still hit me hard. They planned a small ceremony, just immediate family, at a luxury resort in Napa Valley. "Nothing fancy," Mitchell assured me, but I knew the venue cost more than I made in an entire year. I tried to be happy for him, I tried, but Amara made it hard. Throughout the planning, she'd ask for my opinion, only to explain why it wasn't right. "Moren, that's sweet, but we're going for something a little more sophisticated," she'd say, smiling as she brushed away every contribution I tried to make. The night before the wedding, sitting alone in my hotel room, I called Linda again. "I feel like I'm losing him," I whispered, the tears finally coming after months of pretending everything was fine. "Moren, it's normal," she said gently. "When our kids get married, things shift, but it doesn't mean Mitchell loves you any less." But it did feel like less. It felt like Amara was erasing me from Mitchell's life, one careful move at a time. And the worst part, she did it so subtly, so gracefully, that saying anything would make me look like the problem. Like the overbearing mother who couldn't let go. The morning after the wedding, just before they left for their honeymoon in Europe, Mitchell hugged me tightly. "Thanks for everything, Mom," he whispered. I could hear the kitchen clock ticking, the soft hum of the refrigerator, and the low rumble of Mitchell's breathing, uneven and shallow. He was still gripping the papers, his knuckles white, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. The realization was landing heavy, like a weight pressing down on his chest, and I could see it. He didn't want to believe it. Not about her. I didn't want to believe it either, I said gently. Not to accuse, not to press, just to share the truth. But the numbers don't lie, the signatures. She's using your name, Mitchell. She's been doing this behind your back. He dropped the papers onto the table like they'd burned him. I don't understand, he whispered, pacing now, running his hands through his already mussed hair. Why go this far? And why would she drag you into it? She's not dragging me into it, I said, my voice firmer now. She's erasing me. This wasn't a coincidence. This was planned. You were away. She made her move. Mitchell stopped and stared at me, and I wasn't here to stop her. There it was, the guilt. The same guilt I used to see when he'd come home with scraped knees and hide a bad grade in his backpack. But this was different, bigger, deeper. Adult-sized betrayal and a heartbreak no mother could shield her child from. I'm so sorry, Mom, he said finally, his voice cracking. I should have seen this coming. No, I shook my head. You shouldn't have, because you believed in her. You trusted her. That's not something to be ashamed of. But you, he said, sitting down hard now, defeated. She came after you. She came after the company, I corrected. I was just in the way. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us trying to catch our breath in the middle of this unraveling storm. Then Mitchell leaned forward, elbows on the table, his eyes searching mine. What do we do now? I had spent the past few hours spiraling through every possibility, every memory, every look Amara had ever given me. I'd thought about lawyers, about reporters, about the board, but the truth was, we had to be careful, strategic. She had already set a narrative in motion. Accusations, NDAs, manipulated perceptions. We build a case, I said. Quietly, we gather everything. Everything. Emails, approvals, transfers, dates. We protect ourselves first, then we expose her. Mitchell nodded slowly, his eyes clearing as a sense of purpose replaced the initial shock. She doesn't know I know yet, he said. I can get more. I can check my accounts, see if there's anything else she's been accessing. Don't confront her yet, I warned. We don't know how she'll react, and we can't risk her destroying evidence. He looked at me with a strange mix of awe and heartbreak. You're still protecting me, even now. I'm your mother, I said softly. That never changes. Mitchell reached across the table and I took his hand. It had been years since he held it like that. There was strength there and fear, and something else, determination. I'll fix this, he said. I believed him, not just because I wanted to, but because the Mitchell I knew, the one I raised, was still in there. Angry now, awake. We sat there for a while longer, the sun fading outside the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the room. The house was quiet, but not empty anymore. The war had begun, quiet, careful, but inevitable, and we would fight it, together. Time. She never even tried to get pregnant. The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. I could hardly breathe, and Mitchell looked like he was drowning in the weight of it. I wanted to say something, anything, but what comfort could possibly exist in the face of a betrayal so cruel, so intimate? He had built his life on a foundation of lies, deep, deliberate ones, and now that foundation was crumbling under his feet. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, as if trying to hold himself together by sheer force of will. I proposed to her because I thought we were starting a family. I wanted to do the right thing. I wanted to take care of her, of us, because I believed she was hurting. His voice dropped to a whisper, but it was all a setup. She knew exactly how to make me fall in love with her, how to make me feel needed. And I did. God, I fell so hard. I didn't know how to respond. I'd always sensed something off about Amara, or Amanda, as I now had to think of her, but never had I imagined the depths of her deception. It wasn't just financial. It was emotional warfare. She'd weaponized my son's kindness, used his empathy like a tool to manipulate and trap him. He ran his hands down his face, exhausted. I keep thinking about all the nights she cried in my arms, the times I held her, believing she was in pain. But none of it was real. I was grieving for something that never even existed. You were loving her the only way you knew how, I said quietly, with everything you had. I need to end it, he said after a long pause. Not just the marriage. Everything. I need to go to the board, the investors. I need to make this right, no matter the bottom. There was a quiet finality in his voice, the kind that comes from having nothing left to lose. I'll be right beside you, I told him. You don't have to go through this alone. He gave a small, bitter smile. I don't even know who I am without her or without the version of her I thought was real. You're still you, I said. Maybe a little more broken, but stronger too. Mitchell stood up slowly, every movement weighted. We need to start gathering everything, emails, contracts, financial records. I want this airtight, no loopholes for her to slip through. I brought the office key, I said, pulling it from my coat pocket. He took it from me, nodding in thanks, then turned toward the hallway. Come with me. I can't do this alone. We walked into the heart of the house together, his once safe space that now felt like a crime scene. He opened her desk drawers, each one revealing more evidence of the double life she had lived. Falsified invoices, burner phones, locked flash drives. She planned everything, he muttered, pulling out a small stack of legal documents tucked beneath a false bottom. She didn't just lie, she built a system, a whole damn infrastructure for it. She's done this before, I reminded him. You're not the first, Mitchell, but you can be the last. Hours passed like minutes. We moved through the evidence like archaeologists of his marriage, uncovering lie after lie until the woman he had loved became unrecognizable. The photos on the walls mocked us, her smiling face, their wedding, the vacations. All of it a carefully constructed illusion. I should have known, he whispered at one point, gripping the edge of the desk as if to steady himself. I should have listened to you. I didn't tell him he couldn't have known. I didn't try to soothe him with lies of my own, because the truth was, he had known. Somewhere deep down, he'd always suspected. But love has a way of silencing that inner voice, especially when the person you're loving is so skilled at silencing it too. By late afternoon, the evidence filled a box on the floor. Mitchell stared down at it, jaw clenched. This is it. Tomorrow I go to legal. I don't care what it cost me. I have to stop her. You're doing the right thing, I told him. She'll deny everything. And then we make sure she can't. He gave me a long look, his eyes no longer hollow, but hard with resolve. I want her out of my life, out of the company. I want to make sure she never does this to anyone else again. I saw a shadow of the man he used to be in that moment, but there was something new there too, something colder, sharper. That's what betrayal does. It carves away the softness and replaces it with steel. I'm going to make coffee, I said gently. You need something in your system. He nodded absently, and I stepped into the kitchen. As I poured the water into the pot, I realized we had crossed a line, one we couldn't come back from. There would be no forgiveness, no salvaging this, only truth, cold, brutal truth. And as much as it broke me to see my son like this, I also knew this was the beginning of his freedom. His heart might be shattered, but at least now he was free of the lies. At least now he could rebuild, even if he'd have to do it from the ground up. Mitchell's voice trembled as he recounted the web of lies he'd been trapped in. Everything she ever told him, the pregnancy tests she'd shown, the ultrasound pictures, the endless doctor visits, fabricated down to the last detail. A carefully staged performance. I watched the folder fall from his hands, the papers fanning out across the floor like pieces of a shattered life. His voice cracked. She faked a pregnancy just to push me into proposing. Then she staged a miscarriage to force me into marrying her right away, so I wouldn't leave her in the middle of her so-called grief. He made air quotes, face tight with revulsion. Every part of our relationship was built on lies. I dropped to the floor, helping him collect the documents, though mostly it gave me something to do with my hands, while my mind reeled from everything he was saying. Scattered among the files were photographs, surveillance shots of Amara meeting with a man I didn't recognize, receipts from fancy restaurants billed to the company's credit card, bank statements showing money quietly siphoned from business accounts into unfamiliar names. Holding up one of the photographs, I asked, "Who is this?" "Marcus Webb," Mitchell replied, his voice gaining a strange calm, the kind that comes with shock worn thin from repetition. "That's her actual boyfriend. They've been together the whole time." He explained that a private investigator had tracked them for weeks. Amara and this Marcus had been living together in a downtown condo, one she'd bought using stolen company funds. Every time she said she was working late, going on a business trip, visiting her sick mother, she was really with him. In the photo, she was laughing, her hand resting on Marcus's arm with a casual affection that should have been reserved for her husband. And she looked happy, truly happy, happier than she'd ever looked with Mitchell. "When did you find all this out?" I asked. "The full report came in yesterday morning while I was still in Seattle. That's why I rushed home. I went straight to the office instead of going home. I was ready to confront her, demand answers." He ran his hands over his face like trying to scrub off the memory. "Instead, I found out she'd fired my mother. She's telling people you were embezzling from the company." That part hit harder than I expected. Not because it was new, Amara had always disliked me, but because I realized just how far she'd gone. "That's when I knew," Mitchell said. "She was accelerating whatever endgame she had in mind." He opened his laptop and turned it so I could see the screen. On it was a completed divorce petition, already filled out. She had been planning this for months. In the documents, she accused him of abuse, of coercing her to work at the company against her will, of isolating her from her family and friends. Mitchell gave a humorless, bitter laugh. "Family and friends, none of them are real, but apparently that doesn't matter in divorce court." She had been meticulous. Most of the stolen funds were hidden under names almost identical to legitimate expenses. The forged signatures were skillful, enough to fool most people unless you had a handwriting expert comb through them. And she'd been quietly building her case against Mitchell for months, falsifying emails, staging evidence of his supposed abuse and control. "I feel sick," I whispered. "She's been planning this from the very beginning," he said. "Maybe even before that. The investigator suspects she has done this before with both of her previous husbands. Finds a successful man, rushes into marriage, gets access to his finances, drains what she can while setting him up for the fall. Then she vanishes, taking everything." Silence settled over us like dust. The only sound the soft, rhythmic tick of the old grandfather clock in the corner, Mitchell's father's clock. I couldn't stop thinking about all the dinners Amara had shared with us, all the holidays she'd smiled through, pretending to be part of the family. I remembered the times I'd held my tongue instead of voicing my instincts. "There's more," Mitchell said, quieter now. "Something I need to show you at the office. Something I found on her computer. It explains why she fired you yesterday." I narrowed my eyes. "What do you mean?" "She knew you were suspicious from the start. She's been monitoring your computer activity, tracking what you looked at, which financial documents you reviewed. She fired you because she was afraid you were getting too close to the truth." The irony was staggering. Amara had spent so much energy watching me, trying to cover her tracks, yet she hadn't noticed Mitchell was watching her. "So what do we do now?" I asked. Mitchell closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Now we go to the office, we gather every piece of evidence we can, then we call the police. File charges, fraud, embezzlement, identity theft. After that, I file for divorce and try to salvage what's left of the company." "And you personally? How are you handling all this?" It was the first time I'd asked, and finally his composure slipped. "I don't know, Mom. I thought I knew her. I thought I loved her." How do you even begin to process that your entire marriage, your whole life with someone, was a lie? I reached across the desk and took his hand. "One day at a time, one truth at a time. And remember, not everything was a lie. Your family is real. The people who love you, they're real. The company we built together, that's real too." He squeezed my hand gently. "I'm sorry I let her come between us. I'm sorry I didn't listen to you." "You don't need to apologize for loving someone, even if they didn't deserve it," I said. "But you do owe me an apology for doubting your mother's judgment." I gave him a small smile, trying to lift the weight, if only a little. He chuckled, just barely. "Your judgment has always been spot on, especially about people who didn't deserve us." We stood together, ready to leave for the office. As we prepared to dig into the pile of lies Amara had left behind, a strange sort of relief settled over me. The truth, no matter how brutal, had finally come to light. And truth, no matter how jagged or painful, was always better than the weight of a lie. But still, questions lingered. If she'd gone to such elaborate lengths to cover her tracks, what else had she hidden? What was left to uncover? And how deep did the manipulation go? One look at my son, his expression focused, jaw set, hands steadying as he packed the files, and I knew whatever we found, we would face it together. As we should have from the beginning, before Amara turned him against me, before she made me the villain in a story she had written herself. But now the mask had fallen. The real enemy was exposed, and she had no idea what was coming. We got to the office at 7:30, an hour before anyone else would arrive. As Mitchell slid the key into the front door, his hand trembled. This was harder on him than he let on. Whatever we were about to find in Amara's office would be the final, irreversible blow to the illusion of their life together. The truth was waiting, and we were ready to meet it. Mitchell and I walked together through the stillness of the early morning hallway. The silence felt heavy, the kind that presses against your chest. "Are you sure about this?" I asked quietly. "I have to be," he replied without hesitation. "If I'm going to rebuild this company, if I'm going to rebuild my life, then I need to know everything, every ugly truth, every lie, all of it." He paused in front of Amara's office, his expression unreadable. "Besides," he added, "she'll be here in an hour. If we're going to do this, it has to be now." I used my master key, the same one Amara clearly hadn't remembered I still possessed, not after everything she did to get me fired, and opened the door. As expected, the office was spotless, immaculate, not a single pen out of line. Her desk was arranged with rigid perfection, each folder labeled and aligned, her workspace a shrine to control. While Mitchell headed straight to the computer, I began searching the drawers. In the bottom one, beneath layers of legitimate business files, I discovered a folder labeled Personal Insurance. Inside was a collection of printed emails. Dozens of them, correspondence between Amara and Marcus Webb, written so casually that my stomach twisted. The tone wasn't frantic or hidden. It was calculated, confident. They had been planning this for a while. "Mitchell," I said, my voice tight, "you need to see this." He looked up from the screen, his face already drawn with tension. "Bad news first or worse news first?" I handed him the folder. "Let's start with bad and work our way down." He began reading. As he flipped through the pages, his face hardened, darkening with each line. "She's been setting me up," he said bitterly. "All of this, she's been framing me for the embezzlement." He jabbed a finger at one of the emails. "Look at this one from last week." He read aloud. "M is getting suspicious about the missing money. Time to accelerate timeline. Make sure evidence points to him, not us." I felt my blood run cold. "Evidence points to you?" I asked, already fearing the answer. Mitchell turned the computer screen toward me. "She's been using my login credentials to make the transfers. She must have watched me type my password, memorized it. Every transaction shows my username as the one who authorized it. And the timestamps? They line up perfectly with times I was supposedly in the office." "But you have alibis, right?" I asked quickly. "Meeting logs? Security footage?" "That's the brilliant part," he said, bitter admiration bleeding into his voice. "She chose times I really was in the building, just not at my computer. Meetings, warehouse runs, lunch breaks. It'll look like I left my machine logged in and someone slipped in and used it." We kept digging, and it got worse, much worse. We found detailed records of how Amara had been building a case against Mitchell for months. She'd created a meticulous paper trail of fake incidents, twisted versions of completely normal conversations, all painting him as an abusive, manipulative partner. She even photographed the modest jewelry he'd bought her, pieces chosen with care, and wrote statements claiming he forced her to wear them as symbols of ownership. Every kind gesture, every romantic effort, every time he tried to include her in business decisions, she turned all of it into evidence against him. Mitchell stared at one especially cruel email where Amara described him as obsessive, even possessive, just because he asked why she'd been working so late recently. "How did I not see this?" he whispered. "Because you're not a sociopath," I told him gently. "Normal people don't think like this. Normal people don't spend months plotting the downfall of someone they claim to love. At 8:15, the sound of high heels echoed down the hallway, sharp, precise, deliberate. Amara was early, no doubt eager to keep riding the high of yesterday's success. Mitchell and I exchanged a look. "What do you want to do, Baise?" I asked, lowering my voice. "Confront her," he said. "Let her try to lie her way out." The footsteps stopped outside the door. We heard the key slide into the lock. A sharp breath followed. She'd realized the lights were already on. "Mitchell." Her voice was smooth, composed, just the right shade of surprise. "What are you doing here so early? And Moren, I thought we agreed your access had been revoked." She stood there in the doorway, flawless in a navy suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a glossy sweep. But for the first time, I could see through it. The polish, the perfection. Underneath it all was something cold and predatory. "We need to talk," Mitchell said. He gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Please, sit down." Her eyes darted between us, calculating fast. Then, like a well-trained actress, she composed herself. "Of course, darling," that she said, crossing the room gracefully. "Though I'm not sure why your mother needs to be present for a private conversation between spouses." "Because this conversation involves her," Mitchell said firmly. "It involves a lot of things you've done that involve her." Amara took her seat, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "I'm afraid I don't understand." Mitchell laid the printed emails on the desk like playing cards. "Let's start with these. Your correspondence with Marcus Webb." For a moment, just a heartbeat, her mask slipped. Panic darted across her face before she pulled herself together. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" Mitchell asked, his tone like ice. "Because these emails discuss our marriage, our finances, your plans to extract as much value as possible from both. Would you like me to read some of the more entertaining parts out loud?" Her jaw tightened, just barely. "Mitchell, if you're accusing me of having an affair based on some fabricated documents, I'm hurt, deeply hurt, after everything we've been through together." "Fabricated?" I couldn't help myself. "Are you seriously going to sit there and lie when we have photos of you with him?" Mitchell pulled out his phone, opened the photo album, and turned the screen toward her. The image was undeniable. Amara and Marcus Webb locked in a passionate kiss outside a downtown condo. "Taken last Tuesday," he said coldly. "The day you told me you were in Sacramento, visiting your sick mother." Amara stared at the photo. Her eyes flicked left, then right as if trying to calculate escape routes. We could see her thoughts playing out behind her expression. Should she deny it harder, shift tactics, play victim? Finally, she exhaled. "Fine," she said, voice stripped of all warmth. "Yes, I've been seeing someone. That doesn't make me a criminal." "No," Mitchell agreed. "But stealing $200,000 from our company does." He turned his laptop around. "Care to explain these transfers, the ones with my forged signature?" Amara froze, for the first time, truly still. No witty comeback, no sweet denial. This was the kind of evidence that could send her to prison, and she knew it. "Those aren't forged," she said carefully. "You authorized those transfers. You just don't remember. You were under so much pressure with the company, you were stressed." Mitchell laughed, but there was nothing amused about the sound. It was cold and bitter. "I was stressed because the money kept vanishing. Money you were stealing. I was protecting our assets," she snapped. "Moving funds to safer accounts during market instability last quarter." "Safer accounts," Mitchell echoed. "That just so happened to be in your—" He stopped, but we both knew what he was about to say. She had run out of stories, and we had run out of patience. Yitong, seeing her through very different lenses. You were in love, and love tends to soften edges, to blind us to faults we don't want to see. I wasn't in love. I was protective. That kind of instinct sharpens every warning sign, makes every flaw impossible to ignore. Mitchell leaned back, the corners of his mouth pulling into a faint, tired smile. "I guess I needed to go through it, to learn what it means to trust myself again." His voice was calm, but underneath it I could still hear the echoes of those sleepless nights and tear-stained mornings. I kept wondering if the next woman I meet, what if I can't ever trust her, even if she's nothing like Amara? That's not how healing works, I replied, reaching across the desk to rest a hand over his. You don't have to carry her shadow into your next chapter. You've already learned the lessons. All that's left is choosing not to let her define you. He nodded slowly, his eyes distant, perhaps imagining that future without her looming presence. Then he looked around the office, the stacks of neatly filed reports, the quiet hum of the printer, the framed photo of his father and me taken decades ago when this business was still just a dream. She almost ruined this, he murmured. She almost ruined us. But she didn't, I said firmly. We're still here, and we're stronger for it. For a while, neither of us spoke. Outside, the city moved on without us. Cars honking, phones ringing, people going about their lives. Inside, though, it felt like the first moment of stillness we'd had in months. Eventually, Mitchell stood, brushing invisible dust from his sleeves. I'm going to check on the marketing team. They're prepping for the Henderson presentation. Go, I said, and tell them to double-check those projections for Q4. I don't want any surprises. He grinned, really grinned, and it struck me just how long it had been since I'd seen that expression on him. The boy I'd raised, the man he'd become, they were finally starting to feel like the same person again. After he left, I turned back to my reports, but my mind drifted. I thought about Amanda Vulov, Amara, and the wreckage she'd left behind. I thought about the others she'd conned, the people who hadn't been as lucky as we were. I hoped they were healing too. But more than anything, I thought about the resilience it had taken for us to rebuild. Not just the company, but the trust between us. We'd come dangerously close to losing everything. And yet, here we were. Not just surviving, thriving. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, faint and fading. I sipped my coffee and watched the sunlight catch the rim of my chipped mug. It had survived, so had we, and we weren't done yet. Mitchell and I had both been right in our own ways. I could admit that now. Maybe I should have listened to him back then. But if I had, he might have always carried a nagging doubt, wondering whether he'd made the right choice. Sometimes life insists we learn its hardest lessons by living through them ourselves. He sat quietly, gazing out the window at the parking lot, the place where everything had unraveled 6 months ago. Then, in a low voice, he said, I started seeing someone. My heart skipped a beat. Her name's Sarah. She teaches at the elementary school down the street from my house. We met at that little coffee shop on 5th. He smiled, genuinely, and for the first time in what felt like forever, it wasn't forced. Nothing like the strained grins I'd seen after Amara. She's nothing like what I thought I wanted before. Tell me about her, I said. She's quiet, thoughtful. She makes me laugh, but not the kind of laugh where you're putting on a show for someone. With her, it just comes easy. He paused for a moment. I told her about Amara, about everything early on. I didn't want there to be any secrets. And she said, Ahuin. She said that if I could still trust someone enough to tell the truth, then I was already healing. His eyes met mine with a steadiness I hadn't seen in a long time. I want you to meet her, if you're okay with that. His words carried more weight than just a simple introduction. It wasn't just about meeting the woman he was dating. It was about rebuilding trust, about proving he'd learned from the past, about testing whether what we'd been through had made our bond stronger. I'd love to meet her, I said, and I meant every word. Really? His voice was tentative, hopeful. Really? But Mitchell, I need you to promise me something. Anything. No matter what happens with Sarah or with anyone else, don't ever let them convince you that your family is the enemy. What we have, what we fought to rebuild, it's worth holding on to. He reached across the desk and took my hand. I promise, Mom, never again. Later that afternoon, as I packed up to leave, there was a knock at my office door. Emily poked her head in. Mrs. Patterson? There's someone here to see you. She says she's with the FB. My heart dropped. Was there new trouble with Amara's case? Somehow had she found a way to stir chaos even from prison? The woman who entered was young, early 30s maybe, with short brown hair and a serious air about her. She flashed her badge and introduced herself as Agent Linda Chen. No relation to Amara, she added with a dry smile, as if anticipating the question. She sat across from me and said, I wanted to speak with you personally about the Volkov case. Your testimony and the documents you provided were instrumental in our investigation. I'm glad we could help, I replied, uncertain. Is there a problem with the prosecution? Quite the opposite, she said. Thanks to your cooperation, we've now linked Volkov to crimes in 6 states, 2 more than originally thought. The behavioral pattern you helped establish gave other victims the courage to come forward. She pulled out a folder and laid it on the desk. In total, she stole nearly $2 million over the last 8 years. 2 million. I couldn't fathom the destruction that number represented. How many lives torn apart? How many families shattered? How many people left broken, disillusioned by betrayal? What happens now? I asked. She's facing 20 to 30 years in federal prison, Agent Chen replied. Given her criminal history and the number of victims, she won't be eligible for parole for at least 15. She closed the folder. Justice can be slow, but it gets there. When she left, I stayed at my desk, staring out at the dusk settling outside. The office was quiet, most of the staff already gone home to their calm, ordinary lives, untouched by the betrayal that had so deeply scarred ours. I thought of Mitchell, maybe at home now, getting ready for a date with Sarah, the school teacher. I thought about our company, stronger now than before Amara nearly tore it apart. I thought of the team that stood by us when the rumors flew, about fraud, about dysfunction, and never stopped believing in us. But most of all, I thought about what it means to survive, not just business survival or familial survival, but the survival of faith, of trust, of the fragile belief that most people are good at heart, even when we've come face to face with someone who isn't. My phone buzzed, a text from Mitchell. Sarah wants to cook for us on Sunday. Lasagna, she swears it's better than yours. I told her that's impossible, but she's ready to prove it. I laughed, the sound echoing in the empty room. 6 months ago, the idea of another woman trying to win my son's heart, especially through his stomach, would have unnerved me. Now it sounded fun. Challenge accepted, I texted back. Should I bring my famous garlic bread just in case? Definitely. And Mom, thanks for everything. I gathered my things and shut down the office. As I locked the door behind me, I looked back at the place that had been at the center of our worst storm and somehow still stood. The building where I'd been publicly humiliated and eventually vindicated, where my son had come dangerously close to losing it himself and found his way home again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new chances to shape something better. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt something I wasn't sure I'd ever feel again. Peace, true unshaken peace. I drove home through streets I'd traveled for years, already picturing what I'd wear to dinner with Sarah, imagining the conversation we might have about Mitchell, about her life, about what kind of future the two of them might build together. This time I'd meet her with trust, not suspicion. This time I wouldn't assume that every woman who loved my son was a threat to our family. Maybe, just maybe, if life was feeling generous, one of them might be the missing piece that made our family whole. The road ahead was open and full of possibility, and for the first time in a long while, I was ready to walk it.